Welcome, everyone. My name is Maria Gaztambide. I am the Director and Chief Curator of Public Art at the University of Houston System. This is one of the oldest and most significant university public art collections in the United States. I'm so happy that you all are here. This is, for many of you, you may know this is our second on-site, off-site artist conversation, which is a monthly series with where we're checking in with artists in our collection. It's an effort of, it's public art's effort to sort of recast our public programs into a virtual sphere of engagement. So it's relatively new for us, but it's also giving us some opportunities to be more far-reaching, and we're really excited about having the possibility of linking to people in near and faraway places. And so Jacob Hashimoto is joining us from Austining, New York, along the Hudson River. And Margo is a little closer, but joining us from Elgin, Texas. This series is providing us an opportunity to talk about a wide range of topics, from public art broadly to our artists' commissions at the University of Houston System, to their changing studio practice, and of course to life under COVID-19, the Black Lives Matter protest movement, and escalating social tensions here in the United States. So we've got a lot to cover, and I thought we would begin by showing you a little bit of both Jacob's and Margo's work. Give me a sec while I get this going. Here we go. So Jacob Hashimoto uses sculpture, painting, and installation to create complex worlds from a range of modular components. His layered compositions reference video games, virtual environments, issues of time and space, and cosmology, while also referencing more concerns that are more deeply rooted in our history. So some of these include landscape-based abstraction, modernism, and also artisan work. His 2010 installation, which I am showing you some slides of, it's titled Cloud Deck, is at our University of Houston downtown location in the Shea building, which houses the College of Business at UHD. It is made up of a floating mass of nearly 9,000 kite-like forms made from bamboo and a very special type of rice paper that I hope we have an opportunity to talk about as we move forward with the conversation. It really does, here's some very nice details. The work is also an exercise in drawing with shadow and light, and it's really, really beautiful. It almost seems like the cloud suspended in time, sort of rain coming out of it. Here are some other works that show his breadth and range. And again, utilize the same sort of structure and compositional devices, but he also experiments with color and patterning. And these last two are pieces that are hung on a wall. Again, you can kind of see the same sort of interest in multi-layering and creating these networks of information. Margo Sawyer is, on the other hand, is interested in relationships between the experience of space and architecture, and also issues of transcendence, and how all of these elements combine into a singular sort of experience. Recently, her practice has focused on creating large-scale and often also public installations that combine parallel interest in art and architecture. Her piece is at the University of Houston in Victoria, and it's called Synchronicity of Color Victoria. It's from 2018, and it was actually our last commission for public art of the University of Houston System. Here are some very, very nice details. It was also the artist's first collaboration with Franz Meyer of Munich. And so I think that we'll have an opportunity to talk to her about how this experience has really allowed her to continue to develop an expertise and sort of an interest in working with architectural glass. Her work, like Jacob's, is also very intriguing, especially because of all the references to sort of light and shadow, and how her work also draws through light, and both of them are very beautiful. This is Margo Margo and her assistants working on some panels for a related work at the U.S. Embassy in Kosovo, which dates from 2019. It is, I think, your most recent commission, right, Margo?
Yes, yeah.
Some very interesting views of that piece. And then some other pieces from recent years. And again, you always see in her work this interest in reflection, color, and how it all intersects with light. So I thought, give me one moment to unshare my slide, my screen. Okay. So I thought we'd begin by, of course, thanking you for your time. We're delighted that you're both here with us. It's really, really generous of you to spend an hour with us, and welcome our participants and us to your studios. Hi, we wanted to know how have you been the last couple of months? Has this been a time of disruption, distraction, or possibly maybe a time for productivity and reflection? So I wondered if you could share with us how you're doing.
Margo, you want to take that?
Yeah, you know, it's been a time of deep reflection and connection with friends far and wide, which has been really sweet. So connecting with friends in France and in India, you know, having conversations with a friend in India about a book that she's doing on some spiritual practices in Kerala. She's documenting, and so I've been her soundboard a little bit to sort of help her with some of the conceptual and technical, you know, rigors of getting a project finished. And then when I said one of my cherished things was doing two conversations with my spiritual teacher called Reb Anderson at the San Francisco Zen Center in California. And that one was people from all over the world. So what he found was so amazing. He just kept looking into the screen and going, I haven't seen so many of you for so long. It's so wonderful to see you. And I really get a sense that this moment has in a way, the world is in a way experiencing the self-reflection time and quiet time that most artists really deal with. In a way, that's our comfort zone, is to be quiet and alone and thinking and unpacking. And you know, I actually think there's going to be some really interesting things. It's also been really, I teach at the University of Texas at Austin, and that has been very challenging. And I think all universities across the country have really stepped up their game, and in a curious way, maybe we're closer to our students than ever before because they're more fragile. I mean, I feel that you have to reach out a lot more. So that, you know, there's a lot of things I think I mentioned before, you know, the COVID wisdom.
Yes.
I think we'll get to whatever those COVID wisdoms are, but I think there's a great moment of learning.
My experience has been a little bit different. I think being in New York really changed, made the experience of COVID much more kind of immediately intense. You know, and we're in Westchester, which is north of Manhattan, and it's it's a bedroom community for the city, and in large part, and it's a very kind of culturally diverse small river town that is kind of the service, you know, houses a service community for the rest of Westchester County, which is an incredibly wealthy area. And we ended up being so New Rochelle's here, which was kind of the first case of COVID that was found in the United States, or in this part of the United States. And, you know, and then our community got hit really, really hard. So there was, I think, the highest number of cases of COVID here. Yeah, well, we were the second to Yonkers, but it's been pretty bad. And like immediately we saw a lot of masking and a lot of social distancing, and we shut down on the 11th or 12th of March, and everybody went home. And I work with a pretty good sized staff there, 10 of us all together, but 6 people that work here in the studio on a daily basis, and they all went home and have been working from home. So for the first part of it, we weren't doing a lot of reflecting. We were doing a lot of like, how do we keep working on the projects that we're working on? What's going on with our supply chain coming out of Asia, which we had, a significant amount of things produced there. And, and we actually, because we do produce the kites in China, we've been watching this since very early in January, because we were expecting certain deliveries before the Chinese New Year, which is usually a benchmark for our production. We ramp up to that every year, ship, and then everybody goes home. And as it was ramping up, we were seeing things happening from our Chinese suppliers that were really disconcerting. And so so it's been a very kind of intense, much more mundane sort of experience, and just now, and then we had to figure out all the protocols in terms of how to get people materials, how people were going to work, how do I kind of direct activities remotely, and so the Zoom fatigue started really early, with daily Zoom meetings with my staff, just making sure that we were getting things done, and then how do we drop stuff off, pick things up in ways that keep people safe and isolated, and all those sorts of really tedious things that I think a lot of businesses are really dealing with.
I was thinking that you're running your operation much like most of us are working now. So you continue to do your work, but each person is doing their part from their home. You're not coming together in the physical way that you were before.
Not until this past week or so we started bringing people back. But the other thing was that what was happening here, where we really locked down across the state, wasn't happening in the rest of the country as to the same degree. And what we noticed was that, because we're working on, right at this moment, we're working on a large public artwork for 2 really big pieces at the Portland Airport in Portland, Oregon. They were like, we're just going to keep working, and they're essentially, transportation is considered an essential business. That kind of construction is considered an essential business. We are the only out-of-state vendor that they're dealing with, and because we're the public art component. And so they were just like, we're not going to lose any time. We're still going to hit all our marks, which meant that my team was flying in and out of New York in the middle of all of this with N95 masks and goggles on. And, we're now, now they're out installing, 12 hours a day, whatever, however many hours the Skanska lets them work, to put up these super huge artworks in the middle of this, as Oregon's starting to see more and more cases. And so, it's concerning. It was one of these things that we really didn't want to do. But because all the states are behaving differently and there's different kind of restrictions, and we're under certain kinds of contracts, we felt that we needed to fulfill our obligations to them. But it's been stressful.
I can imagine. What about you, Margo? I know that you typically have a studio assistant, and I know that you bring in more people when you're working on large commissions. What has it been like in your studio right now?
My assistant, she stopped coming because she lives with an immune-compromised partner probably before the lockdown really happened in Texas, because her boyfriend's mother is a CEO of a hospital, and they knew what was coming. And the university shut down just before spring break, and all the faculty had to have crash courses in how to do online teaching. And I actually have one of my graduate students who might be listening, who's from China, and I was particularly worried about her and reached out to her really early on. And she was really worried because she was seeing, exactly the same thing happening in America that had happened 2 months prior. And now we are, this summer, we're gearing up to potentially be back teaching in the fall. And that's been incredibly stressful because we're having to, last week I had to get, every department, they had to get their protocols for the sculpture lab, for the print lab, for the fab lab, for the wood shop, for the painting studios. And because there's the pressure to be on teaching in person and maybe hybrid. Sorry?
You guys are 100% coming back to the studio?
Well, I mean, the plan is to come back to campus. I think all the large classes will be online, but situations like, say, an 18 number, say, painting class, we might be able to do half one day, half of them in the studio and the other half working off-site, or a smaller class, of 9, and they get to come in twice. But just trying to prepare all that has been, just labyrinthian. And our poor chairwoman has been, put through the ring. I mean, I think everybody has. And then some really great things have happened. Some faculty who you wouldn't have imagined, could cope with the technical, computer things became like the best, the best stewards and knowledgeable of all these things. So, but it is, I think I am an optimist, but in this situation, I am a pragmatist. And I think, I just think, this is so serious that we really have to, I mean, it's such a serious thing. And so to be back in person is really, just incredibly challenging.
And how to do that safely.
Yeah. So, and I suppose what we're trying to do in UT is to bring back the graduate students onto campus and to see how that works. Because, if that doesn't work. But last week, I mean, this is a COVID wisdom. I've worked at University of Texas for 30 years. And last week, the Dean of Graduate or Academic Studies had a system-wide meeting of all the people who work in the arts. So it was like the Dean of the Music School in Brownsville and somebody in Dallas. And so, all these colleagues from across this big system that I had never met before, and we're all sharing our concerns and issues, and just something like that would never have happened. So we're getting to meet people and talk to, connect and in ways that, and talk about really important issues collectively. So that sense of collective wisdom, I think, is so important. And Jacob, I think maybe with your team, you're maybe even closer because you're having to, to really share. There's even more of a sharing and empowering.
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, we're
tight.
We're trying to be as transparent with each other as possible, I think, and just kind of, because there's so little guidance given to us, I think we're just trying to craft, methods of working around the studio that are, that keep everybody kind of safe and insulated from each other. There's HEPA filters everywhere, and it's pretty crazy what we've done downstairs with the whole working situation. So it's, but I do agree that, erring on the side of caution is what we've been trying to do. We were facing a situation where we're just looking, I think everybody is, in the university probably is too, is, we're looking at a situation that isn't going to be very changeable for quite a while. So it's like, we have to either make a decision to not come back before a vaccine's available, or we need to figure out if there's a way to work more safely, and even at home, it's going to be an issue because I have to go to Portland next week or in 2 weeks to supervise the completion of these pieces, and and then when I come home, the issue is how do we quarantine at home for 2 weeks and quarantine from the staff and continue to work on the projects that we have deadlines on. So it's been an interesting kind of logistical, juggling act.
Yeah.
But people have really, at the same time, I think that people have really stepped up. My staff is amazing, and they're super responsible, and they've done really good work while we've been, separated. So I think that, I'm thankful for that.
That's great. So I thought we'd talk for a moment. Both of your commissions are large scale and deeply affect the architecture, the mood, the color, even just the overall sentiment around the spaces that they occupy. Can you talk more about that interaction, and especially that interaction between the viewer and all the magic that happens around your pieces, in particular as it relates to your commissions at our campuses?
Do you want to start, Margo?
No, you go first. You go first.
My piece is older, so my memory of it is a little dimmer than maybe Margo's is. But we were brought in, University of Houston was actually really cool about this because they brought us in super early in the process of, deciding what the artwork was going to be for the building. So they were still well under construction when, they were deep in the construction process when they contacted us about doing the artwork. And that allowed, what it did was it allowed us to work with the engineers and the architects to design a kind of structure that would, house whatever we wanted to put in it. And oftentimes what happens is that, we come in late in the game and we have to retrofit buildings, and it's just a nightmare. And then, Mike Goodry and I talked a lot, and we kind of went back and forth about what the plan for the drawing was, or for the artwork was going to be. And it's interesting because the way that we did that commission then was just a series of sketches. It was very analog. It was real old school.
Was this your first kite project? That shape that you used, was this your first one?
No, this was well into the body of work.
Okay.
So it happened. The first kite project was done in '96, so this was much earlier.
Okay.
But it was one of the first public pieces that we had done. So the challenges of having a piece in that environment with so much sunlight, with in this kind of enclosed atrium, and kind of for the first time really considering how the artwork was going to interact with the front of the building and the kind of approach to the facade, and how it would change as you move through and into the space, and what people's relationship to it would be as they walked up the staircase that wraps along the side. All of those things, it was kind of the first time I was challenged to deal with those on a permanent kind of basis. And so it was a real leap of faith for the university, but also a real gift to me to be able to work at that scale on something that had those kinds of concerns, which I think that when you're working the studio on a smaller scale, you manage, it's just easier to manage. And there was a lot of chaos. We had talked a little bit about this before in our interview, but there's a lot of chaos that went on site, because we'd never done it this way. We'd never made a piece this way before. We'd never packed a piece this way. We'd never unfurled it in this kind of manner. And this is the first time we used kind of a chandelier winch that drops the whole superstructure down, because the building had been built and we didn't want to, we wanted to figure out a way that we could hang it without having to build an entire deck of scaffolding through the whole atrium. And so what we did was we designed it around this kind of chandelier, this series of 2 winches that came down, which meant that we had these 2 construction dudes that worked with us the whole time to kind of raise and lower this thing as it went down. And it was and we did some things wrong, and we fixed them on site, and we figured it out. It was the first of many kind of trials in public artwork. I think we were talking.
I have to say it's really successful. It's still holding up very nicely. I think There's one person who is joining us today who says she or he works in the building, and it's a pure joy to be surrounded by light pieces every time that they go up. She or he goes up the stairs. So
well,
big
that's
fan.
So I guess, is there anything else that you need me to add to that response?
No, that's perfect.
Okay,
Perfect.
Margo.
Yeah, and so with my project, I proposed something that was more integral to the windows of the building originally, that were going to be colored, I suppose, gels in the window that would be part of the architecture. And time-wise, there was a real worry about that. And I think the committee said, well, what about the atrium? You know, the atrium is a really great space. And so originally I had designed these acrylic structures that would suspend from the ceiling. And the method of hanging and then the weight of these, 9-inch square, 6-foot long solid pieces of acrylic was sort of a conundrum and a riddle. And I would wake up in the middle of the night like, oh my God, it's killed somebody. I would just be so worried. And I had just started a project with Franz Mayer, working on a private chapel. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I could make these out of glass, and I could be working with Franz Mayer in Munich. And I came back to the committee and represented this sort of new, sort of now like third or fourth iteration, and they loved that idea. And it really was the first time working with Franz Mayer in a really structural way. So, they're very much sculptures hanging in a space, and there were, like all sculptors, the engineering challenges. So the I-beams could only hold a certain weight per beam, and then, so it only allowed for a certain number of elements within this space. And then, of course, the chorus within the space, you couldn't, as it's glass, you couldn't have them turn and click.
Right. They move ever so slightly, and that really affects the quality of the light and the colored reflection, which is beautiful.
Yeah, and I really wanted them to turn, and I wasn't sure if they really would, but when we installed them, they just magically, the air conditioning is sort of quiet enough, and it's not dramatic, it's just very quietly moving. And it really sort of activates the space. I think it's a hard piece to photograph because it's maybe more in your memory of an experience of the piece and your relationship to the one-on-one sort of quality of color. They're interesting because they feel there are these lights in the walls, and I wanted to have a conversation with them. And they really do. I mean, but that happened kind of indirectly.
Yes.
And then this sort of chorus of color. I work with color. I'd say color is my muse. And, every time I work with color, it's a different type of material. So whether it's anodized metal, or it's velvet, or it's powder coated steel, or it's car paint, or it's blown glass, or here it's hand painted glass. And there's a real kind of I suppose almost alchemical quality to the painting of the glass. And I've had to learn, I feel like I'm going back to university and kind of like rediscovering the kind of alchemy of color with Franz Mayer. And and then when you walk through their buildings, there's all these other projects happening and these fragments from other artists' work, and it's really, you're kind of like in this this nexus of creative problem solving and creative invention. And I really, so Jacob and I share something very much in common, in that it's a we, not me. I very much love working in a team, and there's there's expert, I just love bringing in different experts. And so like sometimes the color studies, I think I had a number of assistants helping me with the color studies, and then I would do some color studies, and and then we ask a team of friends, and it evolves over time. And then with this particular project, there were like, oh no, Margo, you can't do that in the glass world. So then really listening to the experts of Franz Mayer, the team, the hand painting. You might want to go to that picture of the
Yes, right here. Moving. Yes.
Yeah, because they partner you with an artisan, and this is Steffi, who she can read me like a book. I mean, it's sort of like and so the gestures, and I know I have a real bond with her now, and it's a very special. You're working in a family house. The mayors, they live in the building, and you live in the building, and the artisans come at 7:30 in the morning. They're okay, get to work, but it's really it's just magical, and learning the layer of color and what it does. It's the antithesis to Albers. It's like a whole new science of color.
Well, even for you, these works, and I just wanted to say that you've since realized this other work at Kosovo, and it's along the same line, so the same sort of trajectory, and I think you've now become enamored of this method of working.
Yes.
For me, they're completely antithetical to your earlier work, such as the ones at Discovery Green, where color is bulky and big and sort of solid. It's very interesting to see how you've evolved. I wondered if you could share with us what our piece did our piece propel you into this direction?
I think so, in the sense of the architectural nature, the structural, suspension, weight, dealing with the architecture. Obviously, Discovery Green is very much dealing with the architecture, and my work in general, like the Jacobs, it's really a marriage of the space, the volumes within the space, how the space speaks to you, and then how the work can live, but also how the work can live practically, because you have to practically get it in there, and the sort of dynamism. But really the last 3 years is kind of like a new dawn. Like, so the Discovery Green, I'm sort of known for those. I mean, it's become this iconic, much loved work. And I think these new pieces, I just finished a spiral for Sam Houston State University in January of this year, and same footprint, but different color scheme and different structure. But it really excites me to have walls of color that change with light, and the color, you can see the brushstrokes in the shadows more so than in the glass. And for me, that, I don't know, it's just a bit mind-boggling that you can see a different phenomena, and they really are. So a lot of my work, the color is kind of coded. So I'm multiracial. My parents, when they got married, were in the 50s. It was illegal in America for an African American to marry a white woman, and because my mother was English, I think they were not imprisoned. And they got married in my uncle's apartment in Manhattan, and he was one of the Harlem Renaissance painters, Aaron Douglas.
Aaron Douglas, yes.
Yeah, who I never
met. Storied history, storied family lineage, especially during these times.
And actually, these pieces, there is a kind of a quality of color that actually kind of has a conversation with his work, which I think is really interesting for me, particularly like the green and the top right piece. But all of them have a little bit of a quote of some of the way his paintings work and the shifts. So it's been interesting just to sort of, through this piece, sort of really re-looking at his work and getting to know him more. I never met him, but it's this family legacy, and I suppose about our time. I mean, it's the history of race. I think will always be very complicated, and so for me, I don't make political work about being multiracial, but there's this sort of code in there of the word color. But yet there's also this almost like a jazz improv kind of play of color and light and unity that I think.
Yes, I was going to say all of these elements and the viewers in response to your work come together through it. That is really evoked quite beautifully.
Yeah.
Jacob, I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit. I know that we've talked in the past about how materials are so important to your work, and I wondered if you could talk to us briefly about that. What have you learned? What do you continue to learn about the materials that you employ in your work?
I mean, there's several things. I mean, one is, the kite work really started in the 90s. And, at the time, I was an art student and I was incredibly poor, and I was kind of using whatever I had around the house or that I could find at the dollar store, whatever, to make objects. And I think there was a sense of that it didn't matter how long it lasted, and it didn't, and there's a beauty and a fragility to those early pieces, and an immediacy that, and kind of a imprint of those materials is kind of a diary of my existence at that moment that I think, is powerful. But as years went on, you started seeing these materials fail and change and kind of crumble into dust, and so I had to keep learning how to kind of make those materials or things that felt like those materials in ways that were more durable, and ways that were more useful kind of to the longevity of the artwork. And so right now for the paperwork, we use mostly Japanese papers, and some European papers, and a handful of like Thai papers. But a lot of people like to talk about the paper as kind of like this thing that is about like my Japanese American heritage, and the bamboo is something that's really specifically Asian. And and for a long time I've kind of pushed back on that, because I think that on one hand, I did work with a Japanese printmaker for a long time, so I know a lot about handmade Japanese papers. But if anybody else in the world, if any culture in the world made paper like this, I would use it, because it's really the best paper for the particular application that I use it for. If you know anything about paper making, you know that paper has a direction. It has a grain to it. So like when you get a sheet of paper, like magazine paper wet, it'll start curling or buckling along the direction of its manufacture. And, in the handmade Asian papers typically are rocked in a decal. And so their fibers interlock in an infinite number of directions on the plane. And because of that, when you get it wet, they tend not to buckle very much or at all. And so because most of what I do is like wet application of paper onto wet paper, I can put 3 inches of paper stacked up if I wanted to, and none of it would buckle or wrinkle. It would just sit flat and glue in these really tidy sorts of structures. So what it allowed me to do is start making really complex patterns and surfaces that were smooth and almost paint-like without, with just using paper without having to paint or do anything. So it allowed that kind of freedom or that immediacy of like hand cutting the paper, this kind of Matisse-like gesture that you can get in this work. And about, I think a decade ago, we had a bunch of these, because I used to use like really high, like really artisan made specific rare papers from Japan. And a lot of those papers, they're made by incredibly famous mills. And, some of them are made by like Japanese national treasures, these old men who've been making papers for their entire life. And the problem with that is that these guys are making papers with the same recipe that their parents made papers and their grandparents made papers. And the dyes and the ways that the dyes are made are ancient, and they're incredibly fugitive. They change and they disappear. I'm sure Margo, working with all these different paints, from powder coating to, acrylics, is abundantly familiar with the ways that different materials change. A yellow in acrylic is going to change from a yellow in glass, so, but the paper colors are incredibly, they just evaporate or change, and they can become really beautiful. But as I was getting pieces back to the studio that were 10 years old, and everybody's like, well, why did my greens turn brown? And we were replacing stuff. We actually got to a point where I was like, I don't want to use any more color because it's going to be a nightmare for me. I can't be 80 and like repairing things that I made in my 30s. So we actually stopped using color for a couple of years until, and I think we discussed this a little bit before, but until my paper supplier, Hiromi, from Hiromi Paper International, she brought a young paper maker my age from Japan and brought him to my studio in New York and said, introduced us, and she said, this is Hiroya, he wants to make paper for you. And I was like, all right, and I explained to him kind of what the limitations of paper in the world was at that time. I was like, we cannot find paper that does what I need it to do. And he, and we'd been, at the time, we'd built this kind of elaborate testing machine. So we were vetting all of our papers under like 24 hours of like really intense UV light for months and months and months, and charting how it changed. And so we understood a lot about how the different papers were behaving. And I knew what I wanted out of the paper if we were going to go back to using color. And so we said, this is the standard that you need to meet for us. And and he went home and he made us some paper and sent it to us, and we tested it, and it was terrible. It was worse than the paper we had. And then, he sent another sample, and it was even worse than the first sample. And then he disappeared. And, and about 6-7 months later, we get this sample in the mail. And we open it up, and this is amazing kind of neon colors. And it was different than the paper we had before. It was clearly made in a different way. And we tested it, and it was amazing. It was like the most amazing paper we'd ever seen. And then from that point, and we still tested because different colors still behave differently. But from that point forward, we basically replaced our entire palette. Now we've got, thousands and thousands and thousands of sheets of paper, because what we do is I'll now fashion a color. I can paint it and mix it, send him a sample of whatever color we want, and he'll make me 100, 200 sheets of it.
So you have essentially collaborated with him as well to sort of advance his own craft, which is really fascinating.
Yeah, and he was also trying to find a way to kind of innovate within his industry, because it's a dying art. It's like these small mills aren't going to exist in a couple of generations. And so I think that he was like figuring out like, where are there gaps in the market where I can move in. And I think that, I think for students, any students that are listening, this is great paper, and Hiroya will make it for you too. We don't have a corner of the market. It's really, really useful stuff because it does things that other papers don't do, and it allows you to get colors that you can't otherwise get. It's really changed the way I work quite a bit working with Hiroya. It just opened a lot of doors to possibility. I mean, we sacrificed some things, and so we still use some of the older papers because they're the kind of organic character of them, or the fibers are really specific, and it gives you this certain feeling that you can't get any other way. But for most of the large color sections, we're using Hiroya. And then with other outside of the paper, I could go on for hours about materials, but I mean, for the public artwork, we did, the piece at the University of Houston in paper and bamboo, because those were the materials that I was really good at, and that paper that we were using is like this incredibly heavyweight rayon paper that's used mostly for kind of archival repairs of documents and things like that. It's, you know, pH neutral. It's actually machine-made paper. And we impregnate it with this kind of a high resin content acrylic. And then that's spread across in sheets on all these frames when we trim it out. And then we reinforce the adhesion on the backside. But as we started moving forward with the paper, University of Houston, Texas is, because it's very well climate controlled, it's not really as big an issue, but like when we look at other places like Chicago, for example, where you have lobbies where people are tracking mud and salt and all sorts of things through, and we did a piece on a cruise ship, you know, it became evident that we couldn't use the paper and the wood for those applications. It also became, at University of Houston, it's not an issue because it's contained, but for other spaces where you're hanging above people's heads, fire code gets involved in a way that really is prohibitive because you run into drapery laws and all of that stuff. And then fire.
Jacob, I think we're losing you a little bit.
All of the kind of archival problems that happen when you. Oh, sorry. I'm not sure what to do about that.
Don't worry about it. So I thought we've gone on for about 45 minutes or so, and I thought we'd open it up to questions while I'm making sense of the questions. I wondered, there's many people that are listening in today who are students, many of whom did not have an opportunity to finish off the semester in the way that they would have liked and missed their studio critiques, and sort of were not able to complete their artistic training in the way that they would have liked. And I wondered if each of you would spend just a couple of minutes giving them some advice for these young artists who are listening in.
I mean, I can chime in. You know, it's really, really hard. I think one of the things that we did with our undergraduate students at UT was they did an online exhibition. And so they really had to beef up their make a website, load up all the images on their website, have an artist statement, and really kind of get that professional face out, maybe more so than ever. And I think actually that was a really good, I think of that as a positive thing for students. I did have a number of students collaborate with each other, and that was something really great because I think it really got people outside of their comfort zone. And, in a way, the art world, strangely, is more porous right now than it has ever been. I mean, with all the webinars of different galleries, artist talks like this, I've been sort of addicted to Hauser and Wirth's dispatches and just, like sending them out. And like I sent something out to friends in London about the Met Opera, and I got a text this morning from London like, oh, we got to spend 2 nights of arcane art in, thank you, I think in a weird way the world is being knitted together more. I think, so for me living in Texas, I can't weekly or monthly go to New York, but I'm able to, Alexander Gray Gallery has just done amazing walkthroughs in their gallery spaces of the shows that they have up. And just, like visiting, like get to hang out with Mark Bradford in his studio online. And there's something about, it's just a little bit more porous, the art world. And I think that is a great opportunity. I don't know if it will continue, but I think during this moment, I think there is porosity. And I think to really take advantage of that, and then also the ability to reach out to people that you might need to work with or would like to work with, whether it's being an intern for somebody, even if it's virtual, one of our graduate students, they have a small collective and they've been doing installations in their parked cars in the neighborhood. And, you know, like they're trying to kind of just, you know, like we don't have a studio, but we're going to reinvent what that's going to look like. And I think, and particularly with the galleries, I don't, you know, everybody is being hard hit. And I think artists will need to be more inventive about where their practice lies. I mean, the white cube may not be as readily accessible for young students. And so how this new generation, you know, where they find cracks and new inventions, I think it's a time for invention. You know, it's the academy, the canon. You know, nothing is set in stone. I think it's time to reinvent, which I think is an optimistic thing. But you know, it's hard when you're a student painting in a unventilated space and you don't have the real, you know, you're being more like Van Gogh in his garret than you might want to be. But Jacob, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think those are all good notions, and I definitely agree with this idea of invention. I think that's necessary now. It's been necessary, you know, in many different generations of artists. You know, I came up after, like, I came out of school in the mid '90s, and at the time, you know, we were still kind of living in the wreckage of the late '80s. You know, so there was this, you know, the students today I don't know if they are taught about what happened in the '80s with the collapse of the art market, but you know, everything disappeared. It just evaporated. So, and you know, and for years I remember when I moved to Los Angeles, I worked as an art handler and used to meet these artists who were just completely wiped out, you know, after the crash of the market in the '80s. And that was kind of the ecosystem. That was what the world looked like to my generation of people coming out of school. And there weren't, you know, I remember when like Name Gallery closed and Randolph Street Gallery closed in Chicago, and like all the nonprofits were even closing. And so and the idea of having a gallery show in a white box was like, what are you talking about? That's not possible. I mean, there's like 2 galleries in town. And so I think that, and I actually think for me in the long run in my career, it was hugely beneficial to come out of that environment, because I had to figure out a reason to work that wasn't about, you know, being an art form, that wasn't about, you know, showing a housing birth, you know, if it wasn't, you know, because you couldn't have those expectations for your career. And I think that, you know, things happen in life in this situation that we're in isn't going to be forever. But and how you can motivate yourself to long race, you know. I'm getting your connection is unstable.
Yes, but I think that what you said,
race.
and you have to continue to challenge yourself, right, and be creative with what you've got, which I think Margo also mentioned, that create opportunities for yourself.
Well, yeah, and you're not going to get famous next year, so like, don't worry about next year, and things are going to change and get better. I mean, like if you have to get a job, like, you know, working lawn care, you know, that could be a hugely informative sort of discipline for you to get involved with. I mean, all of this at this stage, when you're just out of school, is opportunity. It's opportunity to learn. It's opportunity to meet new people. It's opportunity to kind of understand your craft and understand your kind of intellectual vision. And, you know, so, and that's the time, regardless of what's happening without coronavirus, regardless of, you know, if the art market is hobbled a little bit, you know, that's what you're going to have to do anyway. You know, even if it was 2008 or 2006, you would have had to do those.
Yeah,
and I think that, you know,
I was going to say,
the one thing.
Yeah. Carry on.
Okay, the one thing I'll let Margo go in a second, but the one thing I would say is that, even before what's happening now with the economy and with galleries, what's happening is there's a huge consolidation going on. So a lot of the lower end emerging artist galleries are already disappearing. They're already not able to make their rent. They're already, and so the necessity of students, regardless of what's happening right now, to the necessity that they had to invent existed before this, exists after it. The whole system is just about to change radically. With the domination of the mega galleries in New York City, even emerging artists here don't have a ton of opportunity, and so it's incumbent upon artists to find audience and to invent ways to do that. And I think that with the tools that are available now, there's a world of possibility or potential that is largely untapped from what I can see. And I'm not the person to do it. I think it's the young artists coming out right now who understand that technology, who understand that ecosystem, who understand those venues that are going to create new models that are going to work for them over their lifetime. So.
No, what was I going to say? Oh, one of the things I did when I first graduated was working with other artists. So I was an assistant to Joel Shapiro and Jackie Windsor and Michael Herson, and then worked as a gallery girl at Paula Cooper's, installing work and stuff. And, all that was a way of really learning and seeing what that system was. But, I've always loved hiring my former students, and I really feel like it is like training the next generation. And I really love seeing, some of my former students getting commissions and doing work, but they really learned a lot just by being around this studio and all the many different things that happen. And I don't think it's, everybody has a different skill, and not everybody, I think the we is just much stronger, especially today. And then, with all the art fairs that are happening, and now they're happening virtually, I think there's ways that artists can kind of interject and intersect their work, but to not be defeated by this moment, because I think there's going to be born of this time. I think there will be many more artists that will be growing out at this time. Young kids who, maybe they're 10 or 11, and just like probably Jacob and I were 10 or 11. I mean, we kind of threw ourselves into drawing and painting and working on these kids working on the computer. But I think there'll be more artists, in 5 years than we have now. So I think it's and a desire, because in a way the arts have been one of the things that have carried us through, whether it be choral things. Yale did an amazing job. The photography department, they had visitors come, and they had Malcolm Gladwell, they had Gwyneth Paltrow, they had all these amazing artists, actors, theorists to speak. And then, every day there was just a new person, and all that, those resources are still online, and people can look at them. So I think it's really an important time to maybe just become like a real nerd about a subject, and really, burrow down into finding out as much as you can about something. So, and reinvent yourself.
And like you said before, I think artists maybe lead the way in the sense that you are used to working in isolation. You are used to deep diving on a subject, and we have a lot to learn from you. So thank you. I'm sure the students among the participants really appreciate that. I have two quick questions for Jacob. One for Marie. She would like to know the name of your paper maker in Japan. You could share that.
Yeah, his name, I mean, I don't know don't know what the name of his mill is, because we work with Hiromi, but I know his name. But if you contact Hiromi Paper International, and ask her what paper Jacob Hashimoto is using. She'll tell you.
So the contact is Hiromi Paper International.
Yeah,
right?
they're in Los Angeles in Culver City.
And then another question for you, Jacob, from Sartasha. She wants to know if you could qualify the number of hours to complete your work. Think about your work at UHD. How long did it take you?
Oh gosh, that piece, it's hard for me. I mean, all of them are really hard to tell. I don't think I'm going to be able to give a good answer for that. I would say probably if it was me sitting with a stack of sticks in front of me, could take me a year to do it. I think because I work with staff and I work with fabricators, it's hard to kind of calculate exactly, how much time any single piece takes. And like, for example, the wall piece behind me, 5 or 6 people worked on that at different points in its development before it came up here to my room where I finish it. And some of the pieces, the small parts, have been made maybe a year ago as part of another group of work that we were making. And because if you walk through the studio, you would see like there's just like boxes of these things and those, it's like a bead shop almost, because we have just so much material. And some of it was made 3 years ago, some of it was made 4 years ago, some of it was made yesterday. And, so it's hard to tell how long any single piece takes. And then sometimes, like when it comes to this floor, it'll take me 3 days to finish something, and sometimes it'll take a month because I made mistakes that I have to then fix or cut back all the way back and rebuild. The process around here is this kind of strange combination of almost printmaking and painting, because there's a huge number of intuitive decisions that are made. And sometimes and all the painters know this, when you get involved with the painting, sometimes that painting just happens. And then other days, it's just like you set yourself an equation that almost works, but isn't quite there. It isn't quite there. It isn't quite there. And 3 years later, it's still not quite there. And then you just decide you have to give up on it, and take what you've learned and, bring it to your next project. And sometimes that happens. So it's really, it's hard, but mechanically, I mean, if there's a true interest in this, I could probably give you a number per piece.
So we've talked for a little bit. We're kind of reaching our hour, and I'm going to kind of mesh together a few questions that have to do roughly with the same thing. So it's been this past 3 or 4 months have been incredibly trying, incredibly painful for some people, given everything that's transpired. But Margo, you've mentioned that it's also been a time of reflection, isolation, and then also of transformation. I wondered if each of you could share with us one final thought about what lessons you have learned, or what are you taking away from this period?
I'm taking, so I live alone, and communicating with others is really important, and keeping myself connected has been really important. And I realize that my friends, we think with Facebook and whatever that we kind of know what our friends are doing, but it's really important that just to have person-to-person contact like this, and really begin to share ideas. So yesterday I was finishing up a proposal, and my friend from London, was calling up, and so I'm quizzing her about my presentation and what I'm doing, and we're going back with different ideas, and it's the conversations are becoming more global than local, which I think is really interesting. And I think it's really important to be optimistic, and we are the seat of our power and control, and from us, we can be change agents. And so each and every one of us, we have to from my Buddhist retreat, it's the vow of being an artist, it's the vow of being a good citizen, it's a vow of respecting your neighbor and your enemy. it's a vow to be, you know, to help teach and nurture. So I think in a way this time is sort of like, you know, committed me to the journey of being an artist, and really at this new opening of glass and color is, I feel like I'm a beginner again. I feel like I'm, but the old way of thinking and doing, I think it's a reimagination of what, and time, you know, what Jacob was talking about, because I'm working in Munich, we have to time all our activities so that, you know, when we finish, it's their morning, and their morning, we have to make sure that they've got food to do. So that's been really interesting over the last 4 years of really kind of, the creative time is not just my time. It's an expanded,
Collective.
yeah, collective time. And I think that's a very healthy, I feel globally much more connected. I mean, I've lived all over the world, and, you know, I kind of have that in my DNA in a way. But at this moment, I really feel the world is connected, and I think being connected is the most important thing. Being fractured is the most dangerous. And I think as an artist, how we knit our communities together, from small to big to the world, I think is huge.
What about you, Jacob?
Well, that's just that. Those are lovely thoughts, actually. I have to consider that a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I like Margo's notion of like being a beginner again.
Yeah.
As she was talking about that, I was thinking about this notion that, you know, how we were talking about students, you know, getting out in this period of time, and graduation, and ambition, and all of that stuff, and thinking about it through the context of what's happening now. And I think that I feel like I've been following some of my own advice in terms of like how to take this time and what's important about the practice of the studio, because even artists working where I am today, the point in my career where I am, you know, the foundations are shifting, and I think that being called upon, especially in mid-career, to kind of you know, challenge your views and challenge your notions of meaning and challenge your notions of beauty and possibility and worthwhileness, I think are important things to be thinking about. And, you know, and I think that for a big part of your life creatively, you know, you come out of school, and your job as a student artist, as a student of the arts, is to just push all different boundaries all the time, just kind of, you know, figure out what your limitations are, what your interests are, what means something to you, what's important to you. And I think that I feel like the one thing that I'm called upon to do these days is to be more in that mindset of like thinking about meaning, thinking about purpose, thinking about audience, thinking about context, thinking about, you know, what my past work means in this new kind of cultural, physical, you know, virus-filled ecosystem that we're living in. You know, and I think that because all of that, as the world changes, the art in the world, its meaning changes with the world. So, and I'm thinking a lot about that, like how my work's meaning and what it does in this new world, in this place. You know, every day is a new world. I think the Margo's Buddhist teacher would probably agree with that notion of like now is this kind of constantly evolving moment. But I think, and therefore meaning is constantly evolving and changing, and all the things that you've done in the past are meaningful in different ways or meaningless in new ways. And so I've been thinking a lot about that stuff, and I think that's going to be useful moving forward, is to kind of have this kind of psychic reset where I'm kind of forced to sit back and question, maybe for the first time in a long time, you know, what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and what it means, and where I'm putting it, and the kind of art world that I want to be involved with, and where I want to learn more about, or, you know, I think there's a lot of possibility.
Thank you. Thank you both for those insights, and thank you for being here with us today. This is an ongoing series, and we will have 2 other conversations, one in July and one in August, also kind of bringing in some other artists from our collection and hoping to keep up with you guys. Thank you so much. And thank you, participants. We had people from all over, and it's really rewarding to put this together for everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Maria.
Good evening, guys.
Bye.